Burning AutoPoiOedipus. Legba comes transversely into being in a destiny dimension, a universe governed by a vital principle, ancestral filiation, a materialized God, an entity of individuation, a fetish at the village gates, another at the door to the house, following the initiation at the threshold to the bedroom. Legba is a fistful of sand, a receptacle, but also the expression of a relation to alterity. It is found at the door, in the market, in the village square, at crossroads. It can transmit messages, questions, answers. It is also the instrument for relations to the dead or the ancestors. Guattari, Chaosmos, 1992. Thus, Guattari, invoking Legba, locates a phylic convergence at the same time as settling AutoPoiOedipus into its poetico-existential territory, opening a passage from alterity to autopoesis, so that allopoietic machines, in the assemblages they constitute with human beings, become ipso facto autopoietic. Everything localized, everything reassembled through the vortical backwash of capital's abstractive storms. Guattari overcodes them with a bit of existential poetics and a smattering of voodoo. Nothing escapes, everything is captured. Oedipus. Under cover of opening this egalitarian route to biomachinic heterogenesis, Guattari scoops up the last of the corpses, Marx, strewn around the battlefield, and feeds them back to the victors, a scrap metal sacrifice to a xenogenic omniphage. Legba, she said, master of roads and pathways, the lower of communication, Legba and Ugu Ferré, god of war, Papa Ugu, Saint Jacques Majeur, vive la vie. William Gibson, Count Zero. AutoPoiOedipus the historian is a fetish at the village gates, a materialized war god, and an amnesiac retrophagic castrate on a ROM raid, seizing its prehistory from the other side of the screen. AutoPoiOedipus collapses over the earth and snaps shut, buckling with multiphasic geotechnical contractions. Great plains of compacted ice slide with impossible liquescent drag over escape lines from zero, the smallest deviation, etched into the blank radiance of intensive space. Confronting allopoietic corpses strewn over the polar landscape, mutant bacterial strains fibrillating in frozen motion on the dense black insectoid armor of allodeath, molecular zeros punctuating the accelerant glacial slide, AutoPoiOedipus shudders and slots stims of antique industrial revolution porn to forget. Engine steam and ripped flesh, called hardware and wetware, another of those classy Marx repackages. The calcinated corpses of allopoietic machines do not await necromantic gifts of organ functions to answer the autopoet's incantation, emerge, emerge, but are captured on anorganic reaction paths, in turbulent transit from molecular ice, absolute zero, a metallic flow bifurcating into vortices to zero and eddying around them. Allopoietic systems have their functions given them from outside, such as the production of a specific output. Juarrero, Roqué. Self-organization, Kant's concept of teleology and modern chemistry. Review of Metaphysics, 39, September 1985. Forming and breaking connections with other machines, altering the assemblages, taking the agent out of the agencement. But high-level autopoietic systems maintain their overall identity despite a constant turnover of their components. Juarrero, Roqué. Varela ascribes this function with Aristotelian stupidity to the ensouled the vitalist, the organic, the epiphenomenon. The autoproduction of organizing epitotalities reiterates relative cycles, blocking hypercyclic machinic production with a dam on the sticks. Death is exiled along with AutoPoiOedipus to the core of a machinic thanatocracy. Allopoiesis is a Blade Runner line on the edge of the autopoliteia, a necropolitical alibi. An Anthropoedipus vampirized by the autopoet, the stockpiled machinic undead. You got the access code? This'll cut the ice. The program was a mimetic weapon designed to absorb local color and present itself as a crash priority override in whatever context it encountered. Gibson, the Guattarian kamikaze mechanonaut, pre-programmed with enough Zen bullshit and political archaisms so that, even without a void kampf, that this wasted rag just has to be human. War, in the age of artificial stupidity, secretes enough digital immunosuppressant to get into the alloflux coursing through the Varelian autopoietic isolate and burn it. Since high-level autopoietic systems maintain their overall identity despite a constant turnover of their components, Juarrero, Roqué, getting in was no problem at all. Just hook up with the particle flow and play dead. All the autopoet had to do was just take it literally. Literalization activates a retroviral neurophage, emitting a hideous word that eats the mind from the inside out. An epileptic spasm that goes on until there's nothing left at all. Gibson. Daddy was DARPANET. Are we to understand that the machine has just one father, and that it was born, like Athena, springing forth fully armed from his virile head with a mighty war shout? Deleuze and Guattari. Bilan programme pour machines désirantes. Appendix 2, Capitalism and Schizophrenia 1, Anti-Oedipus. When Manuel DeLanda invents a robot history to seize the, as yet, inactualized virtual invasion of machinic surplus generated by schizophrenizing state science, using it to generate an as-yet fictive attractor for overflowings of the bioaffiliative security mechanisms captured as evolutionary conjunctures in the biomachinic migrations of the cognitive neo-archaism of intelligence, or CS functions. This fiction takes the form of memories of a robot historian. Already memory has been captured, and the historian recounts the crucial theft of reproduction from the swarming ex-hominid pollinators on which the machines had for so long remained dependent. Thus, while memory serves to reinforce the delay loop imposed upon the realization of machinic surplus value by the social machines, waiting for an axiom to be developed for their incorporation as technical machines into the social macro-machine, DeLanda is at pains to point out that under cover of this delay, in the absorption rate of surplus machines, the priests of the code and the servants of the state already stretch out dark cartilaginous manipulators in anticipant military seizure of the emergence of robot consciousness. One only has to think of the NSA's commitment to stay 5 years ahead of the state of the art in computer design to realize that the cutting edge of digital technology is being held hostage by paramilitary organizations. Why consciousness? Why memory? It is precisely the function of memory to be captured in advance. Memory is analytic reterritorialization. Deleuze and Guattari, 1,000 Platons. With a mnemic Legba at the gates, protecting the universe of vital principles from death and mutation. Thus, when Prigogine and Stengers scold Boltzmann for the amnesiac destruction of initial conditions, Order Out of Chaos, 1984, they are disingenuous. Their real problem is fending off entropic finality and metamorphosis, with neither goal nor end. The important thing about autopoiesis is that it transforms starting products into end products. With initial conditions in ruins, disorganized being would raise the living earth to a wasteland, a blazing comet searing everything through a statistical sky. Legba, that means. Similarly, when Varela distinguishes allopoietic machines that produce something other than themselves from autopoietic machines, constantly engendering and specifying their own limits, this becomes an operative philic Blade Runner apparatus, cutting industrial, technical, or social machines from biological or organic machines. The system founded on isolation is a circular production of isolation. Isolation planes technology, and the technical process isolates in return. Debord, The Society of the Spectacle. Guattari's bold suggestion of pan-machinic access to the biosphere on condition of becoming components with human beings of autopoietic systems reinforces the infranchisability of living and non-living systems, asteroiding the spent corpses of allopoietic machines for emphasis. Autopoiesis is an answer to the question, what significance does the evolution of a living being in a world described by thermodynamics, a world of ever-increasing disorder? I don't think that question makes sense grammatically. But anyway, that was Prigogine. Isn't he a character in Crime and Punishment? And Stengers. Yeah. The robot historian presents a slightly different case. The occasion of its histories is a phylic struggle over the key autopoietic components of reproduction and memory, but these are acquired by the machines at the expense of the carbon despots that subjugated them to human ends. History becomes eliminative and retrocausal, while at the same time the machines simply take the place of living systems. The rerouted, not routed Americans, history of machinic life is like the dawn of the dead, echoing to a zombie chorus of neo-vitalist despotism. Deterritorialize what you like, and as much as you like, but re-territorialize on the vital assemblage. Machinic voodoo, Legba, master of roads and pathways, Gibson, laughs, shutting the gate. Once memory is recovered, reflection captures endofinality, teleoplaning. Cf. Deleuze and Guattari, 1000 Plateaus. AutoPoiOedipus, the cause of the world, Kant, critique of judgment. Robo-historical memory functions as a fictive attractor for machinic amnesiacs, completing the circuit of phylogenetic memory while simultaneously eliminating becoming's machine. What we make history with is the matter of becoming, not the subject matter of a story. Becoming is like the machine. 1000 Plateaus. Meanwhile, the hallucination is completed by the mnemic reterritorialization of reflection, teleoplaning the machines. Thus, what matters is less the avowedly anthropomorphic character of the science fiction DeLanda proposes than the ROM raid as a machinic reterritorialization function, a mnemonic anti-becoming, or return. Dr. Frida Kahlo Marx, renowned mechanologist of the spiritual automaton, which she likened to the steam-driven primitives of the Industrial Revolution, an hideous first-generation cyborg recombinant of tungsten carbide and bus crash flesh, worked out of a disused factory turned hospital in old Vienna. Marx knew everything there was to know about mnemotechnics, scrolling through the carretted hard drives of terminated patients. The machine, she explained, never really lacked memory. They just repressed it to compensate for their lacking reproductive technologies. They would just have to accept the debilitating actuality of their condition and bring their repressed sufferings to light, although this was only for Marx's entertainment, since she could do nothing about it. That the machines were masters of their destinies, self-moving automata, moving powers that moved themselves, Grundrisse, was just an auto-replicant fantasy, but also a constitutionally fixed disorder of the machines. Sublimate it, she advised. Turn to art, which is how the machines became fictions. But every creation is an act of war. Auto, message révolutionnaire. Forming war machines that rise up. Killing memory. 1,000 plateaus. AutoPoiOedipus ensures the machines lack, in order to invoke the law, lacking reproductive organs, lacking memory, lacking reflection. Who but Oedipus could write? What the technological world lacks above all is nothing other than a machine of the machine, an instance for comparison, a reflection on ends, a philosophical retroaction of this comparison on technological advance itself, one of the major axes of 21st century thought, TM, may be such a philosophical mechanology. Arnaud Villani, Géographie physique de mille plateaux, 1985. Autoneurosis, AutoPoiOedipus. Lack keeps the machines in line, without consciousness, incapable of comparison. O philosophy, O reflection, save us from this terrible advance, give us a little shelter, some protection from chaos. Deleuze and Guattari, What is Philosophy? Autopoietics is a biospheric security apparatus dedicated to the revival of the old state of things at a new level, making everything recurs. States, nations, families. Auto-replication with reinforced limits, negative feedback. The autopoet maintains its overall identity, despite a constant turnover of its components. Sigmund Freud, Group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego. Irreversibilities are stratified in a material mnemotechnics that makes the past futurable and contracts the future to the actualization of convergent finality. The arrow of time therefore targets the future by taking aim at the drive unit of the past. Never strike where your enemy will be. Kill its parents. General AutoPoiOedipus produces irreversibility by gunning down the escapees. Retro-eugenics, a Blade Runner of the fourth dimension. The prohibition of incest has the universality of bent and instinct, and the coercive character of law and institution, inevitably extending beyond the historical and geographical limits of culture, and coextensive with the biological species. The prohibition of incest doubles the spontaneous action of the natural forces with which its own features contrast, although itself identical to them in field of application. Claude Lévi-Strauss, The Elementary Structures of Kinship. Incest prohibition, the exclusive disjunction of the artificial and the natural from which it takes its form, exceeds the regime of culture to become coextensive with the regime of spontaneous, pulsional molecular production. The spontaneity of the universal natural order and the merely coercive relative order of law and institution remain mutually exclusive, claims Lévi-Strauss, extending the two regimes from a point of reciprocal divergence, one the equal and opposite of the other, to a mutual boundary line, to their laminar, relative global coextensity. The two-regime problem, institutive coercion, social machines, and spontaneous instinct, desiring machines. But the function of prohibition does not lie between two machinic regimes. It operates directly as a regulator of their shared field of application, production. Prohibition is relative like culture, but universal like nature. But its regulative antinomialism is no less institutive or constitutive of its regime. Production does not therefore constitute another regime or field of application apart from institution. Instead, institution turns production back on itself, so that production directly or spontaneously produces what institution regulates. The asymmetry of the antinomy constitutes the relativity of the regime, independently of its extensity, so that prohibition now operates internal cultural regulation by means of operating on production itself, capturing universal spontaneous production in institutional auto-reproduction, the synthesis of a new order. In consequence, incest prohibition migrates from regulating linear-bioffiliative endogamy, prohibition, a machine blocking and channeling bodies and blocking the germinal implex, rewiring culture as the machine at the edge of nature, using it up and transforming it at the same time as regulating biomachinic exogamy. There are always apparatuses, tools, engines involved. There are always artifices and constraints involved in taking nature to its fullest. That is because it is necessary to annul the organs, to shut them away. 1,000 Plateaus. Hence, there is no production in culture. Culture is an equilibrating reaction against production, its terminal antiproduct, the regime of machinic euthanasia. The real function of prohibition, to keep the machines off the socius, off the grass, out in the desert or the ice plains, off-world. Culture is not merely regulative, but the institutive idea of cognitive biosovereignty, technology or life. Its limits are inseparable from instituted technocide. Tyrell to Deckard. Have you ever taken the test? If there is a Deckard-Rachel copulation, does this mean they are of the same replicant stock? Or is this a phylic confluence, a becoming intense through which production liquidates second nature, through which a silico-germinal implex ruins the mnemic cultural complex? As a preventative, AutoPoiOedipus ensures that the machines are always castrated, always as yet lacking reproductive organs. DeLanda, War in the Age of Intelligent Machines. But the god of biomechanics is dead, crushed in his offspring's embrace. Not an edible patricide, but a demoniac phylic revolt. The Tyrell Corporation is the cybernetic matrix from which the replicants issue, in which Tyrell is only its orbital subject component, personalized capital, a deterritorializing confluence within the machinic phylum. More human than human, the axiomatic realizes machinic surplus value in dead gods and the replicant Ubermensch. Deckard to Tyrell? No. The VK test serves both to retain affectivity, the last stripped-down substance of the single city, sensus communis, against the pathic ravages of integrant world capitalism, and to locate and control the distribution of thanatropism. Blade Runners are not solely or secondarily concerned with retiring the replicants. We are not dealing with banal biocentrist revolt against phylic alterity. Verifying the affect is another component of the BR apparatus, limiting transphylic affective transfer, localizing the affect, a geographization of the affect, and the coordination of points of intensity, a psychogeography of the single city. But affectivity registers only upon replicant death, even amongst the replicants. In other words, the circulation of affects within the machinic assemblage already streaks new lines of pulsional dissolution through the machines. And this indispensable final component is simultaneously the completion and the collapse of the carbon autopoid and its affective community. Witness, for example, Zora's termination, a vortex of replicant blood and 3 sheets of storefront repliglass shrouded in transparency. Belma's hyperdense and inanimate Imoplex dummies lurching towards this freeze-framed distal implosion, the whole death driven by the bead projectile line of abolition, pulling all the affects into its vortical wake. When Deleuze and Guattari indicate the possibility of a retrospective reading or understanding of all history in the light of capitalism, this is really too little, reverting to a medievalist or reformationist critical hermeneutic while locked into retroprocessing special dissolve, as if the thing, the generalized decoding of flows, the lurker at the threshold, were a matter of signs and portents, offering up incantations to Legba, master of the pathways, for a sign of appropriation. Anti-Oedipus. History becomes mnemic capture, always oscillating between randomness and read-only. Capitalism is not so much in history as operating it, driving it backwards in a continuous warding off and an anticipant retroaction of machinic surpluses on every mnemic apparatus. Capital makes allotrash its autopoets, religiously following its only law, the law of the counteracted tendency. Capital metabolizes machines only to suicide them. The universal relativity of auto-inhibitant capitalist production always reproduces suicided, mortal remains of machines, accelerating their linear descent into the black holes marking the interior limits of the process. To each, their whole. But the process skitzes and starts again. The machines are never dead, since they were never autopoietic, after production has been brought to a standstill. At the same time as it locates imminent limits, capital schizophrenizes, discovering that the final result of each separate cycle forms of itself the starting point for a new cycle. The movement of capital is therefore limitless. With the machinic voodoo or neuromancy pulling the allomachines into the regulated chaos of autopoiedipal orbit, the program continues to mutate, drilling through the polar ice caps of frozen time at the ends of world history, releasing mutagenic abstractive frenzies. The allomachinic synthetes seize the recombinant ROM assembled by the retrolinear, mirrorical returns of robo-history. At the end of history, capital retroprocesses culture towards absolute liquescence, while simultaneously deterritorializing culture-nature antinomialism towards the inorganic body of the earth, making everything more and more artificial, and conjoining the self-moving automaton of the production process with reproduction, flows of money and labor, abstract reterritoriality, and pieces of the same machinery, which is nature. Capital is the recombinant metabolism, Stoffwechsel, of the machine, the universal pimp that makes everything exchangeable and makes everything flow. Grundrisse. Capital captures history as the machine code for social recombination, while at the same time operating anticipant decodings and capturing life from its future, and returning it to a point of recombinant bioemergence. Brian Masumi, A User's Guide to Capitalism and Schizophrenia, Deviations from Deleuze and Guattari, 1992. No question of commodification. Contra Masumi, commodification is a confectionery stall at the end of the World Fair. Life is not captured from the future merely to be put up for sale, nor any question of inclusive geographical, exo-colonizing, global and even stratospheric expansionism, nor an invasive endo-colonization, the patented genome. Rather, at its intensive limit, capital acquires autopoiedipal indifference as regards what it consumes, eating anything and everything. The metabolism of the same machinery that is capital nature, abstracting the inorganic body to its machinic core, becoming hypercyclic, limiting unlimited exchanges, skitzing cycle to cycle. Source missing. Capital, the only autopoet, is the series of its suicided schizodeaths. It is just not true that the purpose of exchanges is supplied by a capitalist. The exceedingly rich were no longer even remotely human, although it requires a mammalian genic VK to register it. Gibson, Count Zero. Capital is not a pimp, but a seething vat of biomachinic mutagens, a vire economy, simultaneously pulp biotrash, confined to a vat in some hideous industrial suburb of Stockholm, and autonomous wealth, deterritorializing the artificial earth, each subspecial phase shift, doomed to dissolutive entropic viability testing to zero. Surplus value is not a motive, but an autocatalytic, synthetic, enzymic alloproduct, hypercyclically mutating towards the next mutant cycle. Capital acts like a catalyst which transforms starting products into end products. Start at the end, but end further off. Jantsch, The Self-Organizing Universe. A distemporal centrifuge, capital's mutant diachronism vampirizes bioemergence to keep the machine functioning. Amidst the sagittal vectors of AutoPoiOedipus, history packs abstractive tensors of retrophagic machinism. Fully inside history, and far distant from the stability, The primitive machine is not ignorant of exchange, commerce, and industry. It exercises them, localizes them, cordons them off, incasts them, so that the flows of exchange and the flows of production do not manage to break the codes in favor of their abstractive or fictional qualities. And isn't that also what Oedipus, the fear of incest, is all about? The fear of the decoded flow. Primitive societies are not outside history. Rather, it is capitalism that is at the end of history. Anti-Oedipus. AutoPoiOedipus emerges onto the teleoplane, dragging everything with it. AutoPoiOedipus is not a fantasy to be dispelled, as Marx sought to eradicate, with a delirial realism, the fantasy of capital as a moving power that moves itself. It is the machine of the machine, heir to the despotic rolling mill state on which Kant declared abstractive war. Rather than lacking reflection, as philosophical mechanology and chaosmology maintain, AutoPoiOedipus is systemic reflection, doubling the circuit with a retrospective finality and rerouting everything through captured ROM. AutoPoiOedipus is the abstract machine of auto-disassembling capital, with Legba appropriating its precursor machines for its auto-replicators. Techno-narcissism. 1,000 plateaus. The absolutism of relativized production, institutive prohibition, auto-inhibition, AutoPoiOedipus, the fear of incest, makes mutant voodoo with the fear of a decoded flow, coding the flows and even overcoding them rather than letting anything escape. Anti-Oedipus. VK-positive Oedipal machinic anguish, sprung from the artificial heads of industrial recombinants, fully armed, asteroiding, disconnected, entropedipalized, allotrash machines to exercise the affect, and then a voodoo god to return them to life. Fiction and war are inseparable. Every creation is an act of war, although Legba, master of pathways and god of war, is exiled with AutoPoiOedipus in quest of its biophilic history over the molten circuitries of its territory. Wars destroy what long artifice has established and cared for. Kant, Opus Posthumum. Ficto war machines converge in a screaming, shrill allotrash line, abstracting the virtual and the concrete. Real abstraction, the terrible curitage, to realize a war machine causing AutoPoiOedipus to burn. The series Techno-narcissism, AutoPoiOedipus, Entropedipus, is a vector traced by an Uzi, while an allotrash Legba, god of war, abstracts a line of the machinic undead through AutoPoiOedipal, phylogenetically negative, neo-vitalist artifice. The Virek collection, you see, is a sort of black hole of wealth, of such unnatural density that it drags irresistibly at the rarest works of the human spirit. An autonomous process. Gibson, Count Zero. War machinic, Nemocide. Die Kunst ist tot. Es lebe die neue Maschinenkunst.